My sister always stole every man I dated, but this time I introduced her to one who made her regret it forever. My name is Olivia. I'm 25 years old, and I need to tell a story I've been carrying for a long time. It's about my sister Natalie and how I finally managed to break a cycle that was slowly destroying me. It's not a simple story, and certainly not one I'm completely proud of, but it's my story. Natalie is 3 years younger than me, and she's always been the family's golden child. While I was the responsible one, the studious one, the one who got good grades and never caused trouble, she was the beautiful one, the charismatic one, the one who could get anything she wanted with a smile and some strategic tears. Our parents always made this clear through daily comparisons. Why can't you be more easygoing like Natalie? Or, Olivia, your sister has a special way with people, you should learn from her. The pattern started when I was 16. I was dating a senior boy named David. It was my first serious relationship, that intense teenage love that feels like it will last forever. Natalie was only 13 at the time, but she already showed a disturbing intuition about how to get male attention. During a house party, she showed up wearing one of my tightest shirts and started asking innocent questions to David about his hobbies, his dreams, his fears. Within 2 weeks, he broke up with me saying he needed space and wasn't ready for anything serious. A week later, I found them kissing in the backyard. When I confronted my parents about Natalie's behavior, the response was always the same. She's just a child, Olivia. She doesn't understand what she's doing. You should be more understanding with your little sister. But I saw in her eyes that she understood perfectly. There was a subtle satisfaction, almost imperceptible, when she got what she wanted. And what she wanted was always what was mine. At 17, it was Marcus, the basketball team captain. At 18, Jeremy, my chemistry lab partner whom I had studied with for months before we grew close. At 19, it was Alex, whom I met in college and with whom I spent the entire summer talking on the phone. The pattern was always the same. Natalie would appear, show interest in the same subjects they liked, flirt in an apparently innocent way, and within weeks or months, they would completely lose interest in me. The most painful part wasn't losing the boyfriends. Over time, I began to realize that if they were easily seduced by a younger girl, maybe they weren't really the type of man I wanted by my side. What hurt me most was the family's complicity. Natalie was never held accountable for her actions. It was always just a coincidence, or she didn't do anything wrong. The boys just changed their minds on their own. When I turned 20 and entered my 3rd year of accounting college, I thought maybe things would change. Natalie was in her senior year of high school, busy with her own responsibilities. For a few months, I had the illusion that I could finally have normal relationships, without the constant threat of family sabotage. That's when I met Daniel, an engineering student who worked part-time at the university library. He was different from the others. More mature, more focused, genuinely interested in deep conversations about the future. We dated for 4 months before I made the mistake of bringing him to Natalie's birthday dinner. During the following weeks, she asked seemingly casual questions about my routine, my weekend plans, the places I frequented. I knew I was being investigated, but I couldn't imagine how she would discover more details without me inadvertently providing clues. Her justification was always the same, delivered with that sweet smile she'd used since childhood. It's not my fault if they prefer someone younger and more interesting, Liv. Maybe you should ask yourself why you can't keep them interested. And when I tried to argue or show my indignation, she would add, "Besides, I'm just showing the truth about them. If they really loved you, they wouldn't be so easy to conquer, don't you think?" That's how I spent my 20s, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the next person I was interested in to eventually be seduced by my younger sister. I began to develop a strange kind of romantic paranoia, analyzing every interaction, every exchanged glance, every prolonged conversation as possible, signs that family betrayal was starting again. The first cases of betrayal began when I was 16 in high school, and Natalie was only 13, but they evolved into more calculated tactics as she grew up and became a spoiled young adult. Natalie used dramatic tantrums and emotional manipulation to win over Olivia's boyfriends, always being defended by the parents as just a child who doesn't understand. In high school, her tactics were more direct. She would simply show up where my boyfriends were, act lost or confused, and ask for help with homework or advice about teenage problems. She had a natural talent for seeming vulnerable and needing protection, which awakened the protective instinct in boys. In college, her strategies became more sophisticated. She would research my boyfriend's interests on social media, and then casually mention that she also loved obscure bands or independent films they had posted about. She would develop detailed opinions about subjects she had never shown interest in before, just to have deep conversations with them. After several betrayals over the years, Natalie justified her actions with an air of superiority, saying she was showing Olivia that men always prefer someone younger and prettier. The family, especially the parents, always protected the youngest daughter and blamed Olivia for being jealous of her little sister and for not being able to keep her boyfriends interested. What hurt me most was seeing how my parents reacted. When I tried to explain what was happening, they always had a ready excuse for Natalie. She didn't do it on purpose. You're exaggerating. Sisters always compete a little. Maybe you should be less possessive. It was as if I were the villain in the story for wanting to keep my own relationships safe from her interference. Natalie, meanwhile, flourished. She graduated from high school as prom queen, entered college with a partial merit scholarship, and continued collecting admirers like trophies. She always had boyfriends, but none of her relationships lasted more than a few months. When I asked why, she said she was still too young to tie herself to just one person. At 24, after graduating and getting a job at a respectable accounting firm, I decided that maybe it was time to try a different approach. If I couldn't protect my relationships from Natalie, maybe I could at least choose men who were immune to her charm. Older men, more mature, with enough experience not to fall for teenage games. This thought led me to Justin, and Justin led me to the worst mistake of my adult life up to that point. Justin was 28, worked as a supervisor at a logistics company, and seemed to have the emotional stability I was looking for. I met him through a dating app, and our first dates were everything I expected. Mature conversations about future plans, shared interests in books and movies, and a physical chemistry that developed slowly, without rush. For 6 months, I managed to keep Justin completely separated from my family. I invented creative excuses for all family events, said he was traveling for work whenever my mother asked when she would meet him, and even went so far as to create a fake social media account just to interact with him without Natalie being able to track our movements. But every secret has an expiration date, and ours expired during Christmas that year. My aunt casually commented during dinner that she had seen me with a very handsome young man at the mall the previous week. The information reached Natalie's ears, and I saw that familiar gleam in her eyes, that mixture of curiosity and determination I knew so well. "Why did you never talk about this mysterious boyfriend?" she asked later when we were alone in the kitchen washing dishes. "Are you embarrassed of him or something?" I tried to change the subject, but Natalie had the persistence of a detective when she wanted something. During the following weeks, she asked seemingly casual questions about my routine, my weekend plans, the places I frequented. I knew I was being investigated, but I couldn't imagine how she would discover more details about Justin without me inadvertently providing clues. I completely underestimated her determination and resources. On a Thursday afternoon in January, I arrived at Justin's apartment earlier than planned, using the key he had given me the previous week. The door was unlocked, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. I imagined it was the television, or maybe he was on a work call. When I entered the living room, I found Justin on the couch with Natalie. She was wearing a dress I had never seen, with impeccable makeup, and that radiant smile she used when she knew she had won. Justin barely looked in my direction when he saw me. He was completely hypnotized by whatever conversation they were having. "Hi, Liv," Natalie said with fake joy. "What an incredible coincidence. I was just telling Justin about that time when you—" I didn't listen to the rest. Blood was pounding in my ears so hard that the words became distant noise. I knew this scene. I had lived variations of it so many times that my body reacted automatically. Stomach contracting, hands beginning to shake, that familiar feeling that the ground was disappearing from under my feet. "How did you find out where he lives?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out calmer than I expected. "Oh, it was super easy," she replied naturally. I looked up his name on LinkedIn, found his company, called there pretending to be a delivery person with a package to deliver, and the receptionist gave me the address. People are so helpful when you're polite, don't you think? Justin finally looked at me, and I saw in those eyes the same expression I had seen so many times before. It wasn't guilt or regret. It was pure fascination. He was discovering that there was a younger, prettier, more interesting version of me available, and all the emotional investment he had made in our relationship was being rapidly recalculated. I left the apartment without saying anything more. I knew exactly how the story would end, and I didn't have the energy to watch another performance of the same script that had traumatized me for years. Justin called me a few hours later with an elaborate excuse about needing time to think about what he really wanted from life. 2 weeks later, I saw photos of them together on Natalie's Instagram. She had changed her profile to public specifically so I would see. In the caption, she wrote, "Sometimes love appears when we least expect it." Olivia's most serious relationship, of 2.5 years with Justin, with whom she was planning to move in together, was destroyed when Natalie seduced Justin during the family's New Year's Eve party. The betrayal happened in Natalie's room, and Olivia discovered them when she went to warn that their parents were arriving home. It was New Year's Eve, And as always, our family gathered at my parents' house for a traditional celebration. This time I had decided to officially introduce Justin to everyone. After 2.5 years together, it seemed ridiculous to keep hiding him. We were making serious plans. We had talked about living together, about our career goals, about the possibility of marriage in the future. Justin fit perfectly into the family dynamic during dinner. He talked about sports with my father, complimented my mother's food, and was polite, but not excessively attentive to Natalie. For a few hours, I thought that maybe she had finally matured enough to respect my relationships. How naive I was. Around 11 at night, people started preparing for the countdown. I was in the kitchen helping my mother with the dishes when I realized I hadn't seen Justin for a while. I looked around the house and couldn't find him in the living room, on the porch, or in my father's office. I went upstairs to check if he was in the bathroom, but the hallway was silent. That's when I heard low voices coming from Natalie's room. The door was ajar, and when I approached, I could see Justin sitting on the edge of her bed, with Natalie standing very close to him, talking softly about something I couldn't make out. It wasn't the position itself that alarmed me. It was the body language. The way she leaned toward him, how he looked up at her with that hypnotized expression I knew so well. It was the way they seemed completely absorbed in each other, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. I knocked on the door and entered. "The fireworks are going to start in a few minutes," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Are you coming to watch?" Natalie moved away from Justin with that innocent smile she had used since childhood. "Of course! Justin was telling me about his work. It's so interesting." Justin got up quickly, looking slightly disturbed at being caught. "Sorry, Liv. Natalie was showing me her books. I didn't know you two had such similar tastes in literature." Literature. Natalie, who I knew read nothing but gossip magazines and Instagram posts. We all went downstairs together to watch the fireworks, but something had changed. During the countdown, Justin was beside me, but his attention was clearly elsewhere. He kissed my lips at midnight, but his eyes searched for Natalie over my shoulder right after. In the days that followed, the change became more obvious. Justin started asking casual questions about Natalie, what she was studying, what her plans for the future were, if she was dating anyone. When I tried to change the subject, he seemed disappointed. 2 weeks after New Year's, Justin broke up with me. Not with a dramatic betrayal as I expected, but with that painfully familiar conversation about needing space and rethinking priorities. 3 days later, Natalie posted a photo of the two of them at a cafe with the caption, "New friendships can turn into something special." After the episode with Justin, I spent 3 months in a kind of emotional hibernation. I focused on work, went to the gym, watched Netflix series, and avoided any social situation that could lead me to meet someone interesting. It was safer that way, more predictable, less painful. But at 25, loneliness began to weigh more than the fear of betrayal. I started questioning whether it was fair to let Natalie control my love life forever, if I was really going to allow her to turn me into a bitter spinster out of fear of what might happen. It was during these internal questionings that I met Lucas. He was in line at the coffee shop where I always bought my morning latte before work, politely discussing with the barista about the difference between espresso and American coffee. He wore dark-framed glasses, had slightly disheveled brown hair, and carried a leather briefcase that had definitely seen better days. When it was his turn to order, he asked for a simple black coffee, no frills, and laughed in a way that made me smile involuntarily. Our first conversation happened by chance when it started raining hard and we got trapped under the coffee shop awning, waiting for the storm to pass. He commented that he had forgotten his umbrella in the car. I said I always carried an extra one in my purse, and we started talking about planning, weather forecasting, and how it's impossible to be really prepared for everything in life. "I'm a software engineer," he said, when the conversation naturally came to the topic of work. "I spend all day trying to predict all the possible problems a system can have, but I still forget to check the weather forecast before leaving home." There was something comforting about the way he spoke, without hurry, without trying to impress, as if he was really interested in what I had to say. When I told him I worked as an accountant, he asked genuine questions about my daily routine, commented that he had always admired people who could keep everything organized and in order. When the rain finally stopped, he asked me if I would like to have real coffee sometime, in a place where we can sit and talk without needing a storm as an excuse. I accepted, but immediately felt that familiar pang of anxiety. Sooner or later, I would have to decide whether to introduce Lucas to my family. But this time, I decided to try a different approach. If I could keep Lucas secret long enough, maybe we could develop something strong enough to resist Hurricane Natalie when it inevitably arrived. Our first date was at a small coffee shop downtown, far from my neighborhood and anywhere I might run into acquaintances. Lucas arrived 5 minutes late, apologizing profusely and explaining that he had lost track of time solving a bug at work. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about his family in Oregon, about how he had moved here for work 2 years before, about his passion for vintage board games, and his secret dream of writing a science fiction novel. I talked about my college, about my plans to someday open my own accounting firm, about my obsession with true crime documentaries. I didn't mention Natalie once. At the end of the afternoon, when we finally said goodbye, Lucas said, "I know this might seem too early to say, but I have the feeling that you're the type of person I could have known for years and still discover new things about you." During the following weeks, we developed a carefully planned routine. We always met in places far from my home and family. We arranged our dates through a messaging app I kept hidden, and I invented a fictional friend named Sarah to explain to my parents why I was going out more lately. For 7 months, I managed to keep Natalie completely out of my romantic life. I changed my privacy settings on all social media, avoided posting photos that could give clues about where I was or who I was with, and created a parallel social routine that didn't intersect at any point with my family. But the universe has a cruel way of reminding us that we don't control everything. During the Memorial Day holiday, the whole family gathered at my parents' house for a traditional barbecue. I was relaxed, carefree, genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. I had spent the previous morning with Lucas, and I still had that inner glow that a healthy relationship provides. My cousin Megan, who studies veterinary medicine at the state university, arrived later than everyone else because she had to work until noon. When she saw me on the porch, she came straight to talk to me with that enthusiasm typical of someone who has news to share. "Olivia, I didn't know you were dating someone," she said, hugging me tightly. "I saw you at Lincoln Park last week with a tall man with glasses. You looked super in love. Why didn't you bring him today?" I felt my stomach drop. Lincoln Park was where Lucas and I had gone for a picnic the previous Tuesday. "I think you confused me with someone else," I tried to say, but Megan shook her head vigorously. "No, I'm sure it was you. You were wearing that blue blouse you wore at Grandma's birthday last year." The guy was cute, had a kind of intellectual look. Natalie, who had appeared silently beside me during the conversation, tilted her head with that expression of feigned curiosity I knew so well. "Mysterious boyfriend again, Liv?" she asked with a sweet smile. "Why do you always hide these things from the family?" Natalie immediately began investigating through social media and tracking Lucas through mutual friends. Olivia found them together at Lucas's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. Natalie showed total lack of remorse and even laughed cruelly, saying she always gets what she wants, while Lucas showed complete indifference to Olivia's feelings. On Monday following Memorial Day, I posted a photo on Instagram, just a coffee cup on a table, nothing that could reveal location or company. But within 2 hours, Natalie had liked the photo and commented, "That coffee looks delicious. Where is it? I'm always looking for new places to try." It was a coffee shop I had never frequented before, where Lucas had taken me because it was near his office. I posted the photo without thinking, momentarily forgetting that I now needed to be careful with every detail I shared online. During the following week, I did my best to alert Lucas without sounding paranoid. I said maybe it would be better if we met in different places for a while, that my family was being kind of intrusive lately, and that I preferred to keep our relationship private for now. "It's not that I'm in a hurry," he said during dinner at a Thai restaurant on the other side of town. "But sometimes I feel like you're running from something. If there's something you don't want to tell me yet, that's fine, but I'd like to know that eventually we can be more open about what we have." How could I explain that I wasn't running from him, but protecting him? How could I tell him about my sister without sounding like a bitter and paranoid person? On Thursday of that week, I decided to take a brave step. Maybe it was time to trust that Lucas and I had built something strong enough to survive Hurricane Natalie. I arranged to meet Lucas at his apartment after work. I planned to tell him everything about Natalie, about my history of sabotaged relationships, about why I had been so cautious. I arrived at his building at 5:30 in the afternoon, using the key he had given me 2 months before. The apartment door was unlocked, which was unusual. I entered slowly, calling his name, thinking maybe he was in the bathroom or talking on the phone. I heard voices coming from the living room. Voices, plural. I recognized Lucas's laugh, that genuine laugh I had learned to love. And I recognized the other laugh too, although my brain refused to process what I was hearing until I reached the living room door and saw with my own eyes. Natalie was sitting on his couch, wearing a dress I had never seen, with a posture that indicated she hadn't just arrived. There were 2 coffee cups on the coffee table, both partially empty. Lucas was leaning back in his favorite armchair, completely relaxed, with that expression of fascination I had seen so many times before. When they saw me, Natalie smiled with that familiar fake joy. "Hi, Liv. What an incredible surprise," she said, getting up gracefully. "I was just telling Lucas about that time you saved that cat from the tree when we were kids." Lucas looked at me with an expression that mixed confusion and curiosity. "You never told me you had a sister," he said. and there was something different in the tone of his voice. Natalie is incredible. We were having the most interesting conversation. How did you find me? I asked Natalie, my voice coming out surprisingly calm. Oh, it was easier than I thought, she replied naturally. Remember that coffee photo you posted? I went there several days in a row until I saw you two together. Then I just followed you here and wrote down the address. Today I came back and told the doorman I was your sister and that you had forgotten something important here. He was super nice and let me go up. She laughed in that cruel way I knew so well. I always get what I want. Liv, you should know that by now. Lucas looked between us with a confused expression, but I could see he was already hooked. The same gleam in his eyes, the same posture leaning toward her, the same expression of fascination I had seen dozens of times before. I think you better leave, Natalie, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Why the rush? She replied, picking up her purse slowly. Lucas and I were getting to know each other so well, weren't we? Lucas? He nodded, clearly still under the effect of her charm. She's really special, Liv. Why did you never talk about her? Because I knew exactly what would happen, I thought. Because I knew this moment would come, as it always did. Natalie said goodbye with a kiss on Lucas's cheek that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, and whispered something in his ear that made him smile. When she finally left, Lucas turned to me with that expression I knew meant the end of another relationship. Why did you never tell me about your sister? He asked, and I knew it didn't matter what my answer was anymore. Lucas broke up with me 3 days after that encounter. He didn't even have the decency to invent an elaborate excuse. He just said he felt a special connection with Natalie and that it wouldn't be fair to continue our relationship knowing that. When I asked if the 7 months we spent together meant nothing, he replied that sometimes the right person appears when we least expect it. The right person. As if Natalie were some kind of soulmate he had found by chance, and not a calculating predator who had tracked me down specifically to destroy another relationship. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally admitted a truth I had avoided for years. I hated my sister. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't envy, it wasn't healthy competition between sisters. It was pure and crystalline hatred for someone who had spent almost a decade systematically destroying my ability to trust relationships. To believe I could be loved. To imagine a future where I didn't have to hide every important person in my life. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what if, instead of always running away, I finally gave Natalie exactly what she wanted? Consumed by anger and tired of always being the victim of her spoiled sister, Olivia decided it was time to give Natalie exactly what she wanted. An irresistible man who would teach her a lesson. She used her access to the public records system at the accounting firm where she worked to research criminal backgrounds and court proceedings. The idea came to me during one of those sleepless nights that followed the breakup with Lucas. I was lying in bed, mentally going over all the relationships Natalie had destroyed, when a question arose in my mind. What if I stopped trying to protect my boyfriends from her and, instead, introduced her to someone who would teach her a lesson? At the accounting firm where I worked, we had access to various databases for background checks on potential clients. It was part of our security protocol to detect fraud or financial risks. I had never used these resources for personal purposes, but the temptation was right there, in front of me. On the following Monday, when all my colleagues went out for lunch, I stayed in the office and began to search. I looked for men in the 30 to 40 age range with a history of legal problems related to relationships, marriage fraud, romance scams, domestic violence cases, anything that indicated a pattern of predatory behavior with women. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But with each name that appeared on the screen, with each case I read, I felt a dark satisfaction growing within me. Finally, I had a way to get revenge. After 2 weeks of careful research, I found the perfect candidate, Nicholas Chen, 33 years old, with an impressive history of manipulation and psychological abuse. He had been sued by 3 different ex-girlfriends for financial fraud, had an assault charge that was dropped for lack of evidence, which usually meant the victim was convinced not to testify, and was currently facing a civil lawsuit for a fake investment scheme that had cost several people their retirement savings. The most interesting thing about Nicholas was that he was incredibly charming. His online photos showed an attractive, well-dressed man with that confident smile that could easily be mistaken for genuine charm by someone who didn't know his history. He frequented social events for professionals, always presented himself as a successful investment consultant, and had a special talent for identifying vulnerable women with money. In other words, he was perfect for Natalie. During the following weeks, I studied Nicholas as if he were a work project. I discovered where he lived, a luxury apartment in Chicago that clearly cost more than his legitimate businesses could support, where he liked to eat, expensive restaurants where he could accidentally meet potential victims, and what his hobbies were, golf, expensive wines, and any activity that put him in contact with people who had money to lose. Olivia found Nicholas, a 33-year-old man with a history of psychological and financial abuse against former partners, currently facing multiple lawsuits for investment fraud. She approached him at a cafe frequented by professionals, pretending to be a successful financial consultant looking for opportunities. The first step was to approach Nicholas and establish a convincing relationship. This required careful acting. I needed to seem interesting enough to call him back when necessary, but not so interesting as to become a real victim myself. I chose a cafe frequented by professionals in the financial district, a place where Nicholas appeared regularly on Thursday mornings. I wore my best work suit, carried an expensive leather briefcase I had bought specifically for the occasion, and positioned myself strategically at a table where he couldn't help but notice me. When Nicholas entered, I was talking on the phone about a big deal I was about to close. I used financial terms I had learned at work, mentioned impressive amounts, and spoke with the kind of confidence someone like him would find irresistible. As expected, he approached when I finished the fictitious call. "Sorry for the intrusion," he said with that charming smile I had seen in the online photos. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. Do you work with financial consulting?" "Among other things," I replied, maintaining a mysterious tone. "I specialize in identifying investment opportunities for select clients." We spent an hour talking about business. I invented a convincing persona, an independent consultant who worked with discreet clients, always looking for partnerships with other talented professionals. Nicholas took the bait completely, seeing in me a potential source of new investors for his schemes. At the end of the conversation, we exchanged numbers and arranged a dinner to discuss business opportunities. He suggested an expensive restaurant, clearly trying to impress me, and I graciously accepted. During the following 2 weeks, I carefully built my facade. I created a convincing online presence for my fictitious persona, opened a bank account with some money to give credibility to my investments, and even rented a virtual office to have an impressive business address. Nicholas was clearly interested, not in me romantically, but in the financial potential I represented. This was perfect. I needed him to be invested enough in our partnership to agree to meet my family when the time came. During our third meeting, I casually mentioned that I had a younger sister. "She's beautiful," I said, showing a recent photo of Natalie I had taken from her social media. "And smart. She's finishing college. Has a lot of potential." I saw immediate interest in Nicholas's eyes. It wasn't romance. It was evaluation. He was categorically assessing Natalie as a potential mark, someone young and possibly naive enough to be easily manipulated. "She seems charming," he said, studying the photo with more attention than would be appropriate. "Are you too close?" "Very," I lied. "Actually, she's always asking me to introduce her to interesting men. I think she's gotten tired of college boys." The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to arrange the meeting. The perfect moment came when my mother called to invite me to Natalie's 23rd birthday dinner. "It would be so nice if you brought someone special this time," she said with that familiar maternal hope. "Natalie always brings boyfriends to family parties, and you always come alone." It was the opportunity I was waiting for. "Actually," I told my mother, "I have been seeing someone, Nicholas. He's an investment consultant, very successful. Maybe it's time for you all to meet him." My mother was radiant. Finally, her problematic daughter had managed to get a man who seemed worthy of introducing to the family. During the days leading up to the dinner, I prepared Nicholas carefully. I told him about my wonderful family, about how close and supportive everyone was, and especially about my adorable little sister, who was eager to meet someone mature and established. "She's exactly the type of person you would love," I said during our last meeting before the dinner. "Smart, ambitious, but still with that youthful innocence that's so rare today." Nicholas smiled in that way I had learned to recognize. It was the smile of a predator who had just identified potential prey. "I can't wait to meet her," he said, and I could hardly wait to see what would happen when two people accustomed to being the predators in any situation finally met. During Natalie's 23rd birthday dinner, Olivia arrived with Nicholas and played the role of a completely infatuated girlfriend. He purposely ignored all of Natalie's flirting attempts during the evening, focusing only on Olivia. This awakened Natalie's competitive fury, who intensified her seduction efforts in the following weeks, determined to win once again. Natalie's birthday dinner was held at the family's favorite restaurant, an elegant but not ostentatious place where we celebrated all special occasions. I arrived with Nicholas punctually at 7 o'clock, and I could immediately see the impact he made on my family. Nicholas had dressed perfectly for the occasion, well-cut dark suit, discreet tie, and that air of confidence that conveyed success without seeming arrogant. He greeted my parents with exactly the right amount of respect and cordiality, brought flowers for my mother and expensive wine for my father, and made all the appropriate comments about the restaurant and the occasion. But the most important thing was how he behaved with me. Throughout the evening, Nicholas was the perfect boyfriend. Attentive, affectionate, clearly devoted. He pulled out my chair, asked if I was comfortable, made comments about how beautiful I looked, and included me in all conversations as if my opinion were the most important at the table. It was a masterful performance, and I knew that's exactly what it was, a performance. But for my family, who had spent years seeing me arrive alone at social events or having my boyfriend stolen by Natalie, seeing me with a man who clearly prioritized me was a revelation. Natalie arrived 15 minutes late, making her traditional dramatic entrance. She was stunning, wearing a dress that enhanced all her best attributes, with impeccable makeup, and that radiant energy that always drew everyone's attention in the room. But this time, when she performed her charm routine for Nicholas, something different happened. He was polite, but clearly not interested. When she tried to start a conversation about her studies, he responded briefly and directed attention back to me. When she made jokes, he smiled politely but laughed genuinely only at mine. When she tried to casually touch his arm during conversation, he subtly moved away and took my hand. I could see confusion growing in Natalie's eyes as the evening progressed. She wasn't used to being ignored, especially by men who were with other women. Her frustration became more obvious when she realized her usual tactics weren't working. "Nicholas," she said during dessert, leaning toward him with that smile that always worked. "Olivia told me you work with investments. It must be fascinating. I'd love to know more about what you do." "It's a job like any other," he replied without enthusiasm, kissing my hand. "I prefer not to talk about work during special moments like this. Today is about celebrating your incredible sister." The expression on Natalie's face was priceless. For the first time in her life, she was being publicly rejected by a man who clearly preferred my company to hers. At the end of the evening, when we were saying goodbye, Nicholas was cordial but distant with Natalie. He politely congratulated her on her birthday, but showed no interest in seeing her again or maintaining contact. "It was a pleasure meeting Olivia's family," he told my parents. "Especially someone as special as her deserves a wonderful family." We left hand in hand, leaving behind a Natalie visibly disturbed for the first time I could remember. During the following weeks, Natalie did exactly what I expected her to do. She began asking me questions about Nicholas, where he lived, where he worked, what his hobbies were. She started showing up in places where I normally went, clearly hoping to run into me and have another chance to impress him. I carefully fed her obsession. I casually mentioned that Nicholas liked contemporary art, and the next week she was posting photos of herself at museums. I commented that he appreciated wines, and she started attending tastings. I said he was a man who valued intelligence and ambition in women, and she began posting about her studies and career plans with a frequency she had never shown before. "He seems really special," she said during a family lunch 2 weeks after the birthday. "You two seem very happy together." There was something forced in the way she said this, as if the words left a bitter taste in her mouth. "We are very happy," I replied, smiling in a way I knew would irritate her. "Nicholas says he's never met anyone like me." The plan was working perfectly. For the first time in her life, Natalie wanted something she couldn't have simply by being younger and prettier. Nicholas had resisted her charm, and that only made her want him more. After 6 weeks of pursuit, Natalie finally managed to seduce Nicholas and moved into his luxury apartment in Chicago. She began facing problems when lawyers representing his former victims contacted her, believing she was his new business partner. Natalie invested her $38,000 in savings, money her parents had always given her, in Nicholas's investment fund. Natalie's pursuit became more intense as the weeks passed. She started showing up in places where Nicholas and I met, always with some excuse. She was in the area visiting a friend, there was a store she wanted to check out, she had an appointment that, coincidentally, was nearby. Nicholas, following my script perfectly, continued being polite, but clearly uninterested. He never gave her the kind of attention she was used to receiving, never showed fascination with her beauty or charm, and always redirected any conversation back to me. This was driving Natalie crazy. During a family dinner at the end of October, she finally exploded. "I don't understand," she said, clearly frustrated. "Why Nicholas is so different. Most men—" She stopped, realizing she was about to admit her usual strategy. "Most men what?" I asked innocently. "Nothing," she replied quickly. "It's just that he seems very focused on you." "Maybe it's because he finally found someone worth focusing on," my mother said, smiling at me in a way that made Natalie clench her fists under the table. It was at that moment I realized my plan was working better than I could have hoped. Natalie wasn't just frustrated about not being able to seduce Nicholas. She was genuinely confused about why her usual tactics weren't working. In early November, I arranged the moment that would change everything. I agreed with Nicholas that we would have a public fight. Nothing too dramatic, just enough for Natalie to realize there was an opportunity. We chose a cafe frequented by people who knew my family, a place where I knew the news would quickly reach Natalie's ears. Nicholas and I staged an argument about irreconcilable differences and needing time to think. As planned, Natalie found out about our separation within 24 hours. And as I expected, she immediately saw this as her chance to finally get what she had been pursuing for months. She showed up at Nicholas's apartment 3 days after our fight, ostensibly to check how he was dealing with everything and to offer perspective on his relationship with Olivia. Nicholas called me that night to tell me she had spent 3 hours at his apartment, offering a friendly shoulder, consoling him about the loss of our relationship, and making it clear she was available if he needed company during this difficult period. "She's exactly like you said she would be," he said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Calculating, manipulative, but convinced she's irresistible." "And did you do what we agreed on?" I asked. "Perfectly." I pretended to resist at first, made it clear I was still thinking about you, but slowly allowed her to console me. She left there convinced she was conquering a man who genuinely didn't want to be conquered. The revenge was in motion. During the following weeks, Nicholas followed the script we had created. He allowed Natalie to seduce him gradually, always feigning reluctance, always seeming like a man who was being conquered against his own will. For Natalie, who was used to men who fell easily for her charms, this resistance only made her more determined. She started spending money trying to impress him. Expensive clothes, gifts, dinners at elegant restaurants that she paid for. For the first time in her life, Natalie was financially investing in a relationship, instead of being courted. By Christmas, they were officially dating. Natalie brought Nicholas to the family Christmas dinner as her new boyfriend, radiant with satisfaction at having finally won once again. But this time, she didn't know she had walked directly into a trap. In January, Nicholas suggested she move into his apartment in Chicago. It was an impressive apartment in an expensive neighborhood, and for Natalie, who had always been attracted to external signs of success, it was irresistible. What she didn't know was that Nicholas was financing that lifestyle with money stolen from his previous victims, and that lawyers representing those victims were already on his trail. 2 weeks after Natalie moved into the apartment, she received the first call from a lawyer looking for Nicholas about an investment fraud case. When she said she knew nothing about his business, the lawyer asked if she was the new business partner that some people had mentioned. Natalie was confused, but Nicholas quickly explained that some people got envious of his success and tried to create problems. He said it was important that she not talk to strangers about their private life. That's when he started talking about an incredible investment opportunity he had just discovered. Nicholas became progressively more controlling and manipulative, isolating Natalie from friends and family. During an argument about money, he pushed Natalie, causing a bruise on her left shoulder. When Natalie tried to leave, she discovered he had drained all her accounts and credit cards. The FBI raided the apartment and arrested Natalie as a suspect in the investment fraud scheme. Nicholas's transformation from attentive boyfriend to controlling manipulator happened gradually, exactly as I had predicted based on the history I had found about him. Natalie, who had always been the predator in her relationships, didn't recognize the signs that now she had become the prey. First, he began questioning her plans and activities. "Why do you need to go out with your friends so frequently?" he would ask. "I prefer when it's just the two of us." Initially, Natalie found this romantic. Finally, a man who wanted all her attention. Then, he started subtly criticizing her family. "Your sister has always seemed a bit resentful, don't you think? And your parents clearly favor her. You deserve better than that toxic dynamic." Since Natalie had always had a complicated relationship with the idea that I might have any importance in the family, she easily absorbed these suggestions. By March, Natalie was completely isolated. She had fought with her college friends for repeatedly canceling plans to stay with Nicholas. She had distanced herself from the family because Nicholas convinced her they didn't truly support her relationship. Her only social interactions were with Nicholas, and occasionally with the investors he brought for dinner at the apartment. It was during this period that Nicholas introduced his investment opportunity. He had discovered an exclusive fund that was offering guaranteed returns of 30% in 6 months. It was a unique chance, available only to a select circle of investors, and he had secured a spot for Natalie as a special favor. "It's exactly the kind of investment that will guarantee our future together," he said, kissing her neck while showing impressive documents with fake logos and impossible profit projections. "Imagine what we can do with that return. Maybe even buy our own house." Natalie had $38,000 in her savings account, money our parents had given her over the years to help with studies, and that she had never needed to use because they always paid all her expenses. It was her emergency fund, but Nicholas convinced her it was really her opportunity fund. "Money sitting still is money lost," he said. "And besides, you trust me, don't you?" In April, Natalie transferred all her savings to Nicholas's investment fund account. What she didn't know was that this money went directly to his personal accounts, being used to pay his lifestyle expenses and to finance new schemes. It was also in April that Nicholas's behavior became more aggressive. He started yelling at her for small things, leaving dishes in the sink, arriving 5 minutes late from somewhere, questioning his decisions. Natalie, who had never experienced this type of treatment, didn't know how to react. During an argument about the investment in May, Natalie had asked when she could see some returns. Nicholas pushed her against the kitchen wall. The impact left a purple bruise on her left shoulder, and when she started crying, he alternately apologized profusely and blamed her for provoking him. "You know I love you," he said, hugging her while she still trembled. "But sometimes you make me so frustrated. I'm working so hard to guarantee our future, and you keep questioning me as if you don't trust me." It was the first time Natalie experienced physical abuse, and she didn't know how to process what had happened. She called my mother that night, but when our mother asked about her shaky voice, Natalie made up an excuse about having a cold. Nicholas noticed the call and didn't like it. "Why are you calling your family without telling me?" he asked. "I thought we had talked about maintaining our privacy." From that moment on, he began monitoring her communications more closely. In June, when Natalie tried to access her bank account online, she discovered she no longer had access. Nicholas had changed all the passwords and become the only authorized signatory on all her accounts. When she confronted him, he explained that he had consolidated their finances for greater efficiency. "Real couples don't hide money from each other," he said. "Besides, I understand investments much better than you. I'm protecting our future." That's when Natalie finally tried to leave. She packed her things one morning when Nicholas had gone out for a business meeting, but when she tried to use her credit card to call an Uber, she discovered the account was canceled. When she tried to access her checking account by phone, she discovered Nicholas had completely drained all her financial resources. She had no money for transportation, nowhere to go. She had fought with all her friends, and was too afraid to tell the family what was happening. How would she explain that she had lost $38,000? How would she admit that the man she had conquered from me was now controlling every aspect of her life? When Nicholas came home that night and saw the suitcases, his anger was different from anything she had experienced before. He didn't yell. He spoke in a low voice, which was somehow even more terrifying. "Did you really think you could just leave?" he asked, blocking the door. "After everything I've invested in you? After all the favors I've done for you?" It was at that moment that Natalie finally understood she was no longer in control of the situation. The youngest sister was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison and 3 years of probation, leaving with a criminal record and completely destroyed credit. She moved to Austin, Texas, to try to start over working as a receptionist, away from her parents' protection for the first time in her life. The protagonist underwent therapy for 8 months to deal with the guilt of having orchestrated the situation, but finally felt she had broken the cycle of manipulation that dominated her adult life. The FBI arrived on a July morning. Natalie was alone in the apartment when she heard authoritative knocks at the door. Through the peephole, she saw men in suits with badges, and her first thought was that something had happened to Nicholas. When she opened the door, they identified themselves as federal agents and said they had a search and seizure warrant. "Where is Nicholas Chen?" asked the lead agent. "He went out for a meeting," Natalie replied, genuinely confused. "What's happening?" That's when she discovered that Nicholas was being investigated for multiple cases of investment fraud, money laundering, and financial abuse. The luxury apartment where she lived had been bought with money stolen from at least 15 different victims. The investments he had promoted never existed. And since she was living with him and had transferred money to his accounts, the FBI considered her a possible accomplice. During the interrogation that followed, Natalie tried to explain that she was a victim too, that she knew nothing about Nicholas's schemes. But the agents had evidence that she had received money from him, had participated in dinners with other investors, and had signed documents that placed her as a beneficiary of some of the fraudulent accounts. Nicholas had been smarter than she imagined. He had systematically implicated her in his crimes, using her naivety and greed against herself. Natalie was arrested that day and indicted as an accomplice in a federal fraud scheme. She spent 6 months in jail awaiting trial, time during which she finally understood the extent of the manipulation she had suffered. Our parents hired an expensive lawyer, but the evidence was overwhelming. The best deal they could get was a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, 4 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and the obligation to pay restitution to the victims. Money she didn't have, since Nicholas had stolen all her savings. When Natalie got out of prison, she was a completely different person. The arrogant confidence had disappeared, replaced by constant anxiety and deep distrust of anyone who approached her. Her criminal record meant she couldn't get a job in her field of study, and her credit was completely destroyed. She moved to Austin, Texas, far from the family and memories, and got a job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. It was honest work, but it was light years away from the privileged life she had always known. For the first time in her life, Natalie was truly alone, without her parents' protection, without admirers willing to take care of her, without financial resources to fall back on when things got difficult. As for me, it took months to fully process what I had done. Initially, I felt a dark satisfaction seeing Natalie finally face real consequences for her actions. After years of being her victim, there was a part of me that delighted in seeing her experience what it was like to be manipulated and controlled. But as time passed, satisfaction gave way to guilt. I had deliberately orchestrated my sister's introduction to a dangerous predator. Even though she had made choices that led to the consequences, I had created the situation knowing exactly what the result would be. I started therapy in September of that year. I needed help processing not only the years of trauma Natalie had caused me, but also my own capacity for such calculated and destructive revenge. During 8 months of weekly sessions, I learned to separate justice from revenge, to understand the difference between protecting oneself and attacking, and to recognize that breaking the cycle of manipulation shouldn't involve perpetuating another type of harm. Dr. Sarah Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand that both Natalie and I were products of a dysfunctional family dynamic that had rewarded manipulative behavior and created toxic competition between sisters. "You broke the cycle," she said during one of our last sessions, but at a very high cost. The question now is, how are you going to use this experience to create healthy relationships in the future? Today, 3 years later, Natalie still lives in Austin. I learned through our cousin Megan that she's in therapy too, that she has a small but clean apartment, and that she's slowly building a life based on honesty instead of manipulation. She's dating a veterinarian who works at the clinic, a man who knows her whole story and chose to stay anyway. Our parents finally recognized that the family dynamic they created contributed to both daughters' problems. They also started therapy, and for the first time in years, our conversations don't involve comparisons or competition. As for relationships, I learned to value men who consistently choose me, not those who can be easily distracted by someone else. I've been dating someone for 2 years, a history teacher named David who knows my whole story with Natalie and loves me not despite my mistakes, but including them. The cycle is broken, not in the way I expected, and certainly not in a way I would recommend to anyone, but it's broken. I learned that true victory isn't destroying those who hurt us, but building a life where that kind of pain can no longer reach us. Natalie and I exchange birthday cards now, but we're still not ready for a complete reconciliation. Maybe we never will be. But for the first time since we were children, we're not enemies. We're just 2 women who grew up in a toxic environment, who hurt each other in terrible ways, and who are now trying to figure out how to be better people. Sometimes, breaking a cycle means accepting that some things can't be completely repaired, only transformed into something different, something that allows everyone to move forward.